Young people, please.
What does a real mirror say to your real face and to me? Is there a mirror for the soul? Is there something that you and I can know of what the soul was intended to look like? And you know, the older you get, the more you think of such things in a very sober-minded way. And so I asked myself this question years ago. Is it possible to have a close walk with God and be totally fulfilled as a person? Now, the answer is not as obvious as you and I may sometimes think. If you were totally fulfilled and I were totally fulfilled, why do so many get off the main track? Why do they look for stolen waters? Why do they get into things that ultimately destroy them and rob them from what God had intended for them? What disfigurement then comes in? So here's the question. Is it possible to walk closely with God and really be totally fulfilled in your life? That's the kind of person who ultimately will write no reserves, no retreats, and no regrets. The man or the woman who knows his or her master and will lock stride with that Lord and know that the Lord will never take him or her into a path, but that he intends for the purification of the soul and to make a more sharp instrument out of that one. There was such a man in the Old Testament. His name is Daniel. And I would like to read for you a few verses and take you in a hurried way through some of these thoughts. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of its God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Notice now, please. Young men, without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years. And after that they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. And then you move to that last verse in that chapter. In every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. You know, God was sending them as missionaries. The hosts were going to try and reprogram them. That was the story. Nebuchadnezzar was sharp, but he was brilliant. He knew what he was doing. He took the finest minds that had been brought, particularly these boys, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and sounds like the first Hebrew lawyers corporation or something like that. You know, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what he was doing was training them in the language, the literature, and the philosophy of the Babylonians. You tell me he didn't know what he was doing? Andrew Fletcher, the great political activist from Scotland, said, "Let me write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes its laws." Let me write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes its laws. Literature and music and poetry oftentimes will shape a culture much more than anything else will. So he was indoctrinating them in the literature of the land. Philosophy, the form of argument. He was pouring this. You've got language, literature, philosophy. New men, new birth, according to Babylonian culture. So these 4 boys are about there, and they're being wined and dined and softened up, and they make their decisions. Daniel says to the steward, "Do me a favor. I don't want this dinner every night. Just give me a diet of vegetables and water and so on, an ordinary diet. That's all I want from you, please. He said, I can't do that, the steward said, because the king has ordered us. He wants us to toughen you guys up, build you into something, some real specimens. He said, look, after a certain number of days, if I look any less strong than any of the others, then you can change it. But right now, let me draw the line here, please. Now, why did he do that? Was he not fond of Babylonian food? No. But he knew the more he got accustomed to the comforts of the palace, the more he would get spoiled and find it harder to break away from what it is that they were trying to do for him and what it is he knew that God wanted for him. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. What it means so very clearly was he was actually disciplining his hungers. That's where it all begins. That's really where it all begins. What is shaping the appetite of this culture today? You know what William Blake said about the eyes? This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole and goads you to believe a lie when you see with and not through the eye. You are intended to see through the eye and with the conscience. This culture is changing you into believing that you see things with the eye, devoid of a conscience. This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole. When the imagination is assaulted from the back door, disregarding the front door of reason, it gets you to process ideas more in where your imagination can run wild rather than where the reason can be the gatekeeper and protect you from irrationality. That's exactly what this culture is about. Yes, it may have been a great invention, the day you could sit in your living room and watch a screen. You can see some extraordinary things, from the coronation of members of royal families to spectacular games to tremendous performances, and listen to grand voices and all of that. But it does not come as an instrument devoid of a built-in capacity for a corrupt mind to harness it for the wrong reasons. And what is it that goes on in the imagination of young people today? What is it that goes on? I seldom used to talk about it until I was very close to somebody whose life was totally destroyed, whose home was totally destroyed by pornography. To you as young people, I want to challenge you. You're living in a very difficult world. Very difficult world. I don't know how many can withstand it. You all know the story of this college football player, all that's gone wrong with the cyber world and his imaginary friend or whatever it is. Who knows what actually happened? You know, these things are happening in a world of make-believe. Or you're wanting to believe something that really isn't even there. I don't know what degree this huge thing we call cyberspace has got a frontal attack capacity on your life and mine. And I just caution you as young people, be careful, beware how this thing makes inroads into your life, because it's payday someday. You can inherit the consequences of a small act a long time later. And if you're really talking about no reserves, if you're willing to give up the things that you would love to hold on to, be cautious about what you see and what you allow your mind to toy with, because it's very easy for it to start toying with you. And the only answer that God has given for us, which is truly corrective, is redemption. The corrective. So draw the line in the places that you know will train your appetite. That'll be one of the greatest decisions you have ever made. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite.